Welcome to Reformed Thinking.
And this is the deep dive.
Our mission today is, well, it's a big one. We're taking a single, really powerful set of reflections on the work of redemption. And we're going to try and distill its core claim, which is that all of history, and I mean all of it, is actually one single unified building project.
That's right. And when you read these sources, especially the ones that look at the whole sweep of history, you're really pushed to stop seeing events in isolation.
Right.
Instead, we're being asked to look at the entirety of divine providence, stretching from, the moment of the fall right up to the final day of judgment.
The whole timeline.
The whole thing. The goal is to really grasp how all these events, all the political upheavals, all the different ages, how they all converge on this one magnificent plan, and it all culminates in the laying of what the source calls the top stone.
The final piece of the building.
The final glorious consummation of the work.
Okay, let's unpack this right at the start, because that is a massive claim. The material we're drawing from argues that the work of redemption is, in fact, the greatest of all of God's actions.
It is.
And that needs some immediate justification. I think most of us are used to thinking of creation, bringing everything from nothing, as the ultimate display of divine power. So what details help us appreciate that redemption actually holds this immense scale?
Well, the source defines the greatness of this work through really three connected ideas. The first one is the magnitude of the particular events themselves.
Okay.
The greatness of the work is shown by the specific, profound, and often just astonishing things God did, both to purchase our redemption and then to secure its success.
Right, so it's not just one act, it's a series of them.
Exactly. And in these acts, we see God's glory magnified in a way that, the 6 days of creation, as spectacular as they were, they just don't allow for.
That immediately focuses our attention on the period of the Messiah, on Christ. But the material points out that even before the purchase itself, there were great things done just to prepare the way.
Oh, absolutely.
If redemption is the greatest work, then that preparation must also be pretty spectacular. What kind of preparation could possibly rival the act of creation itself?
In a word, the entire Old Testament, really. Every prophecy, every covenant, every deliverance, from Abraham all the way to Malachi, it was all preparation. But the absolute apex of that preparation, and really the first act of the purchase itself, is the incarnation.
God becoming man.
Yes.
Yeah.
And when we stop and consider the astonishing nature of that, God becoming man, we realize this is an act of condescension so far beyond the scope of merely speaking a world into existence.
I think we sometimes lose the sheer theological weight of that because we're just so familiar with it.
We do.
When we talk about the incarnation, we're not talking about a quick, glorious visit. We're talking about the eternal God consenting to live on earth for, 33, 34, 35 years? And specifically, choosing a mean, despised condition. The source really stresses the duration and the nature of that stay.
It does. The sheer scope of that willing descent into humanity it's just astonishing. It was a sustained life of labor, of temptation and suffering, all of which was required for the purchase.
And that's the key difference.
It is. The greatest acts of creation required God merely to speak a word. The greatest act of redemption required God to suffer and to die.
And the purchase price itself, then, that becomes the single most significant transaction in the entire history of the cosmos. His labors, his intense sufferings, and then finally, his agonizing death on the cross. These are the definitive acts, the center point that all of history turns on.
Right.
If the point of the greatest work is to glorify God's attributes, this transaction shows mercy and justice and holiness all at the same time in a way that creation just by itself couldn't.
And that leads directly to securing the success of the work, which itself required divine acts of unparalleled might. I mean, what great things were done to put him in a capacity to accomplish that success.
His resurrection.
His resurrection from the dead, conquering death itself, and then his ascension into heaven. And this ascension wasn't just a return home, it was a coronation. It resulted in all things being made subject to him.
So the resurrection and ascension essentially placed Christ in the executive position over all of providence. He's given the controls specifically to make sure the work he purchased succeeds.
That's it.
And since that moment, we've seen that success unfolding through these mighty revolutions. The material points to, for example, the overturning of Satan's kingdom in the pagan Roman Empire as a massive historical landmark.
A huge one. And the source doesn't stop there. It asserts that even greater revolutions are still to come, all culminating in the final judgment.
Absolutely. This shows the project is constantly active, constantly disrupting the course of human kingdoms. The scale isn't just about those moments of high drama, it's about the sheer grinding duration.
Which brings us to the second element that proves the scale of the work. Its duration and the sheer number of events involved.
Right, the time scale.
We celebrate the 6 days of creation, but the source contrasts this so sharply. The particular wonderful events that carried on the work of creation, they filled up 6 days. But the great dispensations, the individual acts of providence that carry on the work of redemption, they are so numerous that they fill up 6,000 or 7,000 years, at least.
That is a staggering way to frame history, as one long succession of wonderful works all dedicated to a single continuous project. It completely reframes what we might call secular history. It just becomes chapters in this divine narrative.
It does.
Let's trace this detailed chronology then. The source starts even before what we'd recognize as the beginning of the nation of Israel.
We have to. The work of redemption began immediately after the fall, with that first promise. And great things were done in this affair even before the flood. I mean, consider the scale of the flood itself. The entire world being destroyed by water.
A total reset.
A total reset. And yet, God's church, Noah and his family, was so wonderfully preserved from it, specifically in order to carry on this work. Redemption wasn't paused. The flood was a massive act of global judgment that was subordinate to the continuity of the covenant line.
That's a crucial insight. So judgment and destruction aren't deviations from the plan, they're actually tools for the plan.
Exactly.
So moving past that massive reset, we get into the post-flood era. What follows is this long sequence that's necessary to manage the human race, all leading up to the Messiah.
Indeed. We see the resettling of the world. We see the scattering at the Tower of Babel, an event that dispersed nations and confused languages.
Right.
The source treats this not as some side story, but as a deliberate act of God to set boundaries for the nations. It created the framework within which the subsequent, much narrower redemption narrative would proceed.
And it also involved the shortening of human life.
Yes, which limited the ability of wickedness to compound over these really long generations.
Okay.
These are all global civilization-defining movements, and they're all viewed here as just preparatory work for the lineage of the Redeemer.
And then, after all that, the focus narrows dramatically to the critical step, the calling of Abraham. This marks the beginning of that specific lineage through which the Redeemer would come.
And the story gets narrower, but no less dramatic. We see this long series of providences concerning Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. And their lives were constantly filled with peril, famine, exile, sibling rivalry, enslavement.
All the drama.
All of it. Yet the source emphasizes that the line was always preserved. Joseph's dramatic rise in Egypt, for instance, wasn't just a fascinating biography. It was the mechanism God used to preserve the 70 souls of Jacob's family from famine, ensuring the line survived to grow into a nation.
Which leads right into the spectacular demonstration of power in the Exodus.
Right.
The wonders in Egypt, the display of power at the Red Sea, the 40 years in the wilderness, and then the final conquest of Canaan in Joshua's time. This entire history of the Jewish nation, with its cycles of faithfulness and apostasy, it's viewed not just as tribal history, but as the necessary architecture for the coming king.
It's all about trajectory. And the pace of preparation, it just increases right before Christ's advent. The source talks about the great things God did in so openly overturning the world to make way for his arrival.
You mean things like the Roman Empire?
Exactly. The establishment of the Roman Empire, the Pax Romana, the network of roads, the standardization of coin Greek, all of these massive secular geopolitical achievements suddenly become essential components of this divine master plan.
So, Caesar Augustus, when he commands a census that brings Mary and Joseph to Bethlehem, he isn't acting independently, he's just a subordinate wheel in this grand machine. That's a fundamental reorientation of what we consider great in history.
It is. And the work doesn't stop with the cross or the apostles. Consider the spiritual and political battle that followed, the overturning of Satan's kingdom in the pagan Roman Empire, and then the subsequent preservation of the church during what the source calls the dark times of popery.
Let's pause there and just contextualize that term for our listeners, since it reflects the specific theological categorization used in the source material.
Good idea.
When the source talks about dark times of popery, It is referring to the historical dominance of the Roman Catholic Church, which was viewed by those in the Reformed tradition as an institution that had corrupted the purity of the gospel and suppressed true worship.
That's right. For the author, the institutional corruption and the persecution during the medieval period represented a powerful resurgence of Satan's kingdom.
So preserving the true church through that.
Yes, the preservation of the true church, often just small, scattered groups. Through those struggles, along with the eventual bringing about of the Reformation, are explicitly mentioned as massive institutional and political struggles. But they're just major chapters in the history of redemption's success.
They're not random schisms, they're necessary battles.
They're necessary battles in the ongoing war against the serpent's seed.
And we're told that this list of events continues into our future. The source looks forward to the glorious times of the church yet to come, which will involve great and wonderful things, followed by Christ's last coming on the day of judgment, the destruction of the world, and the carrying of the whole church into heaven. It's just this continuous, multi-millennial chain of cause and effect, with not one link failing. The project is still ongoing.
And this exhaustive accounting, it leads to the third and most crucial point of this first section. Redemption as the end of all God's other works.
The purpose.
The purpose. This allows the source to make its definitive argument. The work of redemption is the principle of all God's works of providence, and crucially, all other works are subordinate to it.
So if you were to put creation and redemption on a hierarchy, redemption wins because it's the reason for creation. Let's spend a moment on that contrast. We might assume creation is an end in itself, just establishing existence, but here, creation is kind of reduced to a prerequisite.
The source uses a very helpful, a very relatable analogy to explain this. The work of redemption is the end of creation, just as the use of a house is the end of its building.
Right. You don't build a house just to have walls and a roof.
Exactly. You build it for living in, for shelter, for its function. Creation is the structure. Redemption is the function, the glorious residence for God's purposes concerning his Son and his people.
And this means that all revolutions, all geological and astronomical phenomena, everything is designed to subserve this one grand design. The new creation is considered superior because the building's purpose is superior to the building itself.
And this superiority of the new excelling the old is a consistent motif in Scripture, which the source draws out in detail. We see this deliberate, increasing quality control.
For example?
Well, the temporary, moving tabernacle gives way to the fixed, glorious temple. The shadowy old covenant gives way to the new covenant established by Christ's blood. The priesthood of Aaron yields to the permanent priesthood of Christ, and the earthly Jerusalem points forward to the heavenly New Jerusalem.
The lesson is clear. Every new structure is superior. It's an escalating trajectory of glory.
Furthermore, God has used creation for no other purpose but to subserve the designs of this affair. The sources argue that God created and disposed of mankind, angels, the earth, and the highest heavens for this specific purpose, to provide a spouse and a kingdom for his Son.
Wow. That puts a tremendous theological weight on the covenant relationship. It implies that the entire cosmic structure, everything that exists, is essentially just the scaffolding for the church.
It does. The entire creation, as the source says, labors and travails in pain. That's a reference to Romans 8, to bring this spiritual marriage between Christ and his church to pass. Everything is instrumental.
This is a powerful synthesizing argument. If redemption is so central, then all other works are either parts of it, appendages to it, or just reducible to it. And that includes even the eternal decrees of God, the deepest, most secret actions of the divine mind.
The source suggests that all the decrees of God somehow belong to that eternal covenant of redemption which existed between the Father and the Son before the foundation of the world. It frames the entire divine agenda from eternity past to eternity future as centered on this one redemptive agreement.
So if the decree of election is part of the covenant of redemption,
and creation is merely the stage to enact election,
then redemption is indeed the principal work.
that's the logic. And this explains why beings outside of mankind, the angels, desire to look into it, and why it is the main subject of all Scripture. Every part of the Bible, its histories, its prophecies, its songs, its doctrines, is focused on this one great subject. It's the central thread that unifies the entire revelation.
Okay, so moving from the sheer scale of the work to its architect, we see how this work of redemption confirms the very identity of God. The whole course of providence is presented as a design that begins in God and concludes in God, which confirms those titles he has in Scripture. Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the ending, the first and the last.
That's right. And the source makes specific reference to scriptural declarations of this character, showing it's not just some generic theological title, it's specifically tied to the unfolding of history and future events.
Right, like in Isaiah 12, I, the Lord, the first, and with the last, I am he. That speaks to God's total dominion over time itself.
And this characterization, Alpha and Omega, is used repeatedly by Christ himself when he's revealing future great events of providence relating to his church. You see it in Revelation 1:21, 22. Christ reveals himself under this title as he speaks of the things that are to come.
So, since Alpha and Omega are the first and last letters of the Greek alphabet,
It signifies his absolute control over the entire historical sequence, from the very first event to the very last. Nothing is outside of his control.
this perspective draws a really sharp, necessary distinction between God and everything he has made. We see how other things are temporary and come to an end. States, kingdoms, empires, they all fall, even the strongest ones.
The world itself is subject to destruction, first by water and finally by fire. Yet God remains the same. He is unchangeable through all ages. He was before the beginning of this course of things, and he will be after the end of them.
He is and who was and who is to come.
Exactly. And this stands in stark contrast to the fate of all rivals. The stability of the work depends completely on the stability of the worker.
The source reminds us of the fate of all these other gods and systems built on human authority. The ancient Canaanite gods, the powerful Roman gods, and the great institutional deceivers throughout history like Antichrist and Muhammad in the source's historical framework, they all perish.
And we should probably contextualize those terms again.
Good point. When the material speaks of Antichrist and Muhammad, it is using 18th century theological terms to describe two massive opposing forces that historically tried to supplant or destroy the true Christian church. Antichrist refers to the perceived apostate power within institutionalized Christendom, which was often identified as the papacy, and Muhammad refers to the political and religious system of Islam, which was seen as an external conquering force challenging the spread of the gospel. The point is that all these systems, however vast or strong they appear, they eventually fail.
They rise and vaunt themselves, and Satan, who has set himself up as the god of this world, will be cast into the lake of fire for his complete punishment. But Jehovah remains. His kingdom is everlasting, and of his dominion there is no end.
This leads us to a really beautiful pair of metaphors for understanding providence itself, starting with the river.
Yes, providence is presented like a mighty river. It begins at the head in God's eternal counsel, and it flows through various windings. It encounters obstacles, but it always maintains its course, and that it empties itself into the infinite ocean that is God,
So as it began in God, it ends in him.
which ensures nothing is lost or accidental along the way.
And the second metaphor is even more evocative, the vision of the mighty wheel from Ezekiel. The source notes that the circumference is so high that it's dreadful, but its rotation begins from God and returns to God again.
The wheel of providence, yeah. All events are like links in a chain. The first link is forged by him, and the last is connected right back to him. This cyclical return confirms the sovereignty of the Alpha and Omega over everything that happens within the sequence.
But if God controls everything, the Alpha and the Omega, where does human agency fit into this complex wheel? I mean, is free will just an illusion in this grand project?
That's a huge question, and the source addresses it by showing how even human opposition is subordinate. The system describes God's operation through secondary causes, which includes the wills and decisions of men, whether good or evil.
So how does that work?
The wheel is full of eyes, meaning it's guided by perfect knowledge and wisdom, not blind fate. Man acts freely according to his nature, but God so governs the circumstances and the issues that man's actions still fall within the overall determined track of the wheel.
So the crooked stream is human sin and error.
But the river still reaches the ocean. Yes.
This naturally leads us to the supreme preeminence of Christ. Since redemption is the sum of God's works, it has to highlight the glory of Jesus Christ as being above all and through all and in all.
We have to detail how the world specifically relates to Christ in this grand scheme. It's not just that he is important, he is the reason for existence. God created the world by his Son for his Son's use in redemption. This is drawn out explicitly in passages like Ephesians 3 and Colossians 1.
Let's zoom in on that idea. Colossians states that Christ is before all and above all, and that all things consist in him, are governed by him, and are for him. This isn't just a theological statement of rank, it's a cosmic mechanism. He is the sustaining power of existence.
Precisely. The world exists as the stage and the means for the unfolding of his redemptive reign. Every molecule, every moment, is held together by him to accomplish his objective.
And this places him in a position of authority above all human power. God sets him as his firstborn, higher than the kings of the earth. His throne is literally above their thrones, not just metaphorically.
And because his kingdom is the product of this supreme work, it cannot fail. All other kingdoms fall, whether they be Assyrian or Greek or Roman. They're all temporary structures. But Christ's kingdom is the last, and it never gives place to another. It is the permanent, final civilization.
The outcome is absolutely fixed then, regardless of the apparent political or social chaos we see.
Yes. We see that whatever changes there are, and however highly Christ's enemies exalt themselves, yet he reigns in uncontrolled power and immense glory. The result is fixed. His people are saved and made perfectly happy, and all his enemies become his footstool. God gives the world to his Son for his inheritance.
Since we've covered the staggering size and the singular target of this project, let's look at the staggering order of it. When we view history this way, not as arbitrary events, but as a determined sequence leading to Christ's triumph, it changes everything about how we understand historical causality.
It does. The consideration of this whole scheme greatly serves to show us the consistency, order, and beauty of God's works of providence.
That is the practical benefit of this perspective, isn't it?
It is. If we behold events in any other way, all looks like confusion, like the tossing of waves driven by blind chance. History just becomes a series of meaningless accidents.
But when you view it through the light of redemption,
Then providence appears as an orderly series of events, all wisely directed in excellent harmony and consistency, and it proves it is not guided by chaos.
the metaphors of order are so critical here. We have to go back to Ezekiel's vision and remember that the wheels of providence are not turned around by blind chance, but are full of eyes guided by the Spirit of God.
Right? Where the Spirit goes, they go. The eyes represent the omniscience and perfect foresight of the Creator, ensuring that even apparent mistakes or unforeseen calamities are actually part of a greater, calculated path.
And the entire sequence of history is shown as converging. All God's works of providence through all the ages, they meet at last, like many lines meeting in one center.
It's not many distinct independent works, but one work, one regular scheme designed from the very outset.
It's described as one building, many stones, many pieces of timber, but all joined and fitly formed together. They have all but one foundation, Christ, and are united at last in one top stone. The unity is structural and deliberate.
Which means every era, every person, every kingdom has a calculated place in the final structure.
We should revisit the river analogy here because it explains why things look so confusing to us, the observers.
Yes. Providence is like a large, long river with innumerable branches, beginning in different regions and at a great distance, yet all of them conspiring to one common issue.
So the individual streams might look crooked from our perspective, and different streams might run contrary ways for a time, sometimes even fighting each other.
Right.
And because of our limited sight, we see obstacles, rocks and mountains that appear to hinder them from ever uniting and coming to the ocean.
A great example is when we see human empires rise up seemingly to crush the church, like the Babylonian or the Roman empires, or the later persecutions under the forces described as Antichrist. These appear as insurmountable mountains destined to stop the river of redemption. Yet the outcome is absolutely certain. They all unite at last. They all come to the same issue, disgorging themselves in one into the same great ocean. Not one stream fails to reach its appointed conclusion.
The stability derived from the beginning and ending in God guarantees the eventual order. This unified scheme leads directly to a strong argument for the truth of Scripture itself, doesn't it?
It does.
If God is pursuing a great design that involves all rational beings and spans all ages, then it makes sense that those rational beings should know what it is. And the Scriptures gain credibility because they alone reveal this overarching scheme.
It's entirely reasonable to suppose that all revolutions from the beginning to the end are parts of the same scheme, all conspiring to bring about the ultimate event the Creator has in view. The whole system is coherent, and nothing else informs us of this scheme but the Holy Scriptures.
So that's the challenge to every other source of knowledge, every philosophy, every religious tradition. The claim is basically no other worldview or religion even tries to do this.
Pretty much. They might have creation myths or end-time stories, but not a single coherent narrative that connects everything in between. Secular history focuses on immediate causes. Philosophy tries to find cyclical patterns. Only Scripture informs us how all things were from God at first, for what end they are, and how they will return to God.
So the Bible alone sets forth a regular scheme or drift in the age-to-age revolutions. It alone attempts to show what God would effect by the things which he has done, is doing, and will do.
And this is vital knowledge for mankind because the entire scheme concerns us directly.
Why is this knowledge so necessary for mankind specifically? The source highlights that rational beings are principally concerned with God's great design.
Well, God's design is centered around his reasonable creatures, not brute beasts or inanimate things. And since God has given us the capacity to see his glory in his works, we must know what his design is.
Right.
How can we see God's glory in his works if we don't know what he aims at by what he is doing in the world? We would be praising the painter for the colors, but have no idea what the subject of the painting is.
And beyond just seeing his glory, we are capable of actively falling in with that design, of promoting it and acting as God's friends and subjects. To do that, we need the map, the revealed plan.
And the Bible provides that map. Here we learn the true original of things, the fall, the promise, and have an orderly account of the scheme of God's works from the beginning through ages beyond the reach of all other histories or archaeology.
We're told what God aims at in the whole.
And how he has contrived the grand design, even utilizing human sin and error to promote his good.
The result is that the Bible gives a rational, worthy, and excellent account of the whole scheme, history, and prophecy, showing forth God's perfections, his majesty, his wisdom, his glorious holiness, grace, and love. Without it, mankind would just be left in miserable darkness and confusion, trying to make sense of apparent chaos without the key to the entire operation.
This magnificent work doesn't just explain history, it magnifies God's attributes far beyond what creation alone can do.
No.
We see the glorious majesty and power of God confirmed throughout this long history of redemption.
We see his glorious power appearing first and foremost in upholding his church for so long, often when it was nothing but a little spark or a smoking flax with the fire almost extinct.
Right, think of the lineage of Christ reduced to just one family in Noah's Ark, or this single line of Abraham, or the church during the worst of the Roman persecutions.
It seems so fragile.
So fragile. The combined powers of earth and hell, all the great empires, all the philosophical attacks, all the spiritual wickedness have sought to destroy it, yet God has never suffered them to quench it, and he will finally bring forth judgment unto victory. This is a display of strength shown in weakness.
It's the sheer irony of the conflict. God causes his people, who are often like a number of little infants in their own strength, to finally triumph over all earth and hell. They shall tread on the lion and the adder.
And the conquest is executed by a person who was once an infant in a manger and who appear as a poor, weak, despised man. Christ conquers his mighty enemies, and he triumphs over them in their own weapon, the cross. That is the ultimate conquest, turning the instrument of his humiliation into the engine of his victory.
The glorious majesty also appears in conquering all those powerful enemies of the church, one age after another. We look at the conquest of Satan, that proud and strong spirit and his hellish host, bringing him underfoot long after he had vaunted himself as the god of this world.
We are constantly reminded that Christ, our Michael, has overcome the devil. Satan was cast out of heaven and down to the earth, and he is conquered, even in that kingdom where his subtlety and cruelty are most apparent.
And the glorious power of God appears in conquering the devil after he had a long time to strengthen himself to his utmost. I mean, think about the timescale. Satan was overthrown in his heathen Roman Empire after he had been strengthening himself since the building of Babel. That's millennia of human civilization being engineered by the adversary.
And he will be overthrown again, more universally, after yet another opportunity to strengthen himself for ages by setting up the two great systems of opposition, Antichrist and Muhammad, systems that dominated the political and religious landscape for over 1,000 years.
Yet, when these seemingly strong kingdoms of God's enemies appear, they look invincible. They build massive structures of institutional authority and armies. Yet when God appears, they seem to just melt away.
Like the fat of lambs before the fire. They're driven away as the chaff before the whirlwind. Those mighty kingdoms which have trampled the world underfoot, they will vanish away like a shadow. They'll disappear of themselves, just as the darkness in a room does when the light is brought in.
And the majesty culminates in the final act. God overturning the world from time to time to accomplish his designs, and at last in causing the earth and heavens to flee away, all for the advancement of the glory of Christ's kingdom. We see the truth of Exodus 15.6 confirmed. Thy right hand, O Lord, is become glorious in power. Thy right hand, O Lord, hath dashed in pieces the enemy.
And moving to the next divine attribute, The work of redemption reveals God's glorious wisdom and providence. It shows the wisdom of God in creating the world, in that he has created it for such an excellent use to accomplish this glorious work. It justifies the entire creation project.
And the wisdom of divine providence shines in bringing great good out of great evil. This is really the cornerstone of the wisdom argument, isn't it?
It is. The fallen ruin of mankind, though sorrowful and deplorable, became an occasion of accomplishing such a glorious work as redemption. That ruin became the opportunity for erecting such a building whose top should reach unto heaven, a building of mercy and glory.
This is a consistent demonstration of divine skill, frustrating the most subtle machinations of Satan and causing his greatest works, like the crucifixion, which was intended to destroy the Redeemer, to be wholly turned into occasions for the glorious triumph of Jesus Christ.
That is the ultimate management of evil. It's wonderful to see the wisdom of God in bringing all such manifold and various changes and overturnings in the world to such a glorious end.
All these events, the wheels of a most curious machine, are directed to a single glorious period at last.
A manifestation of the divine glory, happiness for his people, and an everlasting kingdom for his Son. The sheer calculation required to manage trillions of free choices across millennia and guarantee a single outcome is what makes this the greatest demonstration of wisdom.
Finally, the long history of the work of redemption demonstrates the stability of God's mercy and faithfulness to his people.
Yes. This extended history proves that he never forsakes his inheritance and remembers his covenant. And this provides comfort under all the dark circumstances and confusions of the world.
The prophet Isaiah confirms this absolute immutability. My righteousness shall endure forever and ever. And the very name God revealed to Moses, Exodus 3.12, I am that I am, signifies not only his self-sufficiency, but crucially in this context, his absolute faithfulness to keep covenant forever.
And this enduring nature of God's character is why the psalmist praises his attributes so consistently. Psalm 36 assures us that thy mercy, O Lord, is in the heavens, and thy faithfulness reacheth unto the clouds. Thy righteousness is like the great mountains. These are attributes that are not subject to decay or change.
This stability of mercy is precisely why the psalmist, in Psalm 136, so often repeats the chorus, for his mercy endureth forever. It's a response of ecstasy at the consideration of the perpetuity of God's mercy to his church through every single historical event mentioned in that psalm.
And that history gives us every reason to celebrate that everlasting duration and to take encouragement to earnestly pray for those glorious things which God has promised.
Okay, so here is where the historical and theological architecture finds its final application, in the ultimate division of mankind into two societies.
Right.
This entire great millennium-spanning work is for the church, driven by everlasting love, and it results in their exceeding blessedness.
So what are the consequences of being the subject of this vast central work? The extent of God's favor toward his redeemed people is just staggering. Christ undertook the work for their sakes, and he carries it on for their sakes.
This means the entire engine of providence is running on their behalf. For their sakes, he overturns states and kingdoms. For their sakes, he shakes heaven and earth. The source uses strong language. God gives men for them and people for their life.
They are precious and honorable in God's sight, and this high regard is demonstrated by the cost. God first gave the blood of his own Son, the highest cost imaginable, and then he gives the blood of all their enemies, thousands and millions, all nations that stand in their way, as a sacrifice for their good.
That highlights the absolute priority the church holds in the divine administration of the world. All historical events are judged by how they relate to the welfare of the church.
For their sakes, God made the world, and for their sakes, he will destroy it. For their sakes, he built heaven, and for their sakes, he makes angels ministering spirits. The scope of favor is summed up perfectly in 1 Corinthians 3.21. All things are yours.
Whether Paul or Apollos or Cephas or the world or life or death or things present or things to come, all are yours.
Everything, visible and invisible, is ordered for the good of the redeemed society. This blessed society is redeemed from among men, and the ultimate guarantee is tied to the conclusion of the whole affair. The kingdom shall finally be given into their hands.
And this happens after all the kingdoms of the world are come to an end, and after the earth is removed and dissolved.
Exactly. Deuteronomy 33.29 declares, Happy art thou, O Israel, who is like unto thee, O people saved by the Lord. Their security is absolute because the work that guarantees it is the greatest work of the greatest power.
Conversely, then, those in a Christless condition see their exceeding misery confirmed by this great work. They are never bettered by any of these events.
In fact, their rejection of the greatest work means their guilt is only made greater, and the misery they are exposed to is so much the more dreadful.
They are counted as enemies, the seed of the serpent, whose head the work is designed to bruise. They are liable to be made Christ's footstool, to be ruled with a rod of iron, and to be dashed in pieces. Your standing in opposition to the central work of God is what seals their fate.
This leads to the very solemn conclusion that the glorious times of the church are always the most dismal to the wicked and impenitent. Isaiah 66.14 confirms this concurrent wrath. Whenever glorious things are foretold concerning the church, terrible things are foretold concerning the wicked.
The two societies are perpetually separated in their experience of divine providence, and we see this historical pattern of concurrent wrath throughout the entire history of redemption.
Yeah.
When God delivered Israel out of Egypt, he poured out wrath on the Egyptians. When he brought them into Canaan, he executed wrath on the Canaanites. When they were delivered from Babylonian captivity, signal vengeance was inflicted on the Babylonians.
And the pattern continues right into the New Testament era. When the Gentiles were called and the elect were saved by apostolic preaching, Jerusalem and the persecuting Jews were destroyed in a most awful manner. Deliverance for one group always means judgment for the opposing group.
Because history is a battleground between the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent.
That's right. And we're told this will hold true in the future, in the glory accomplished at the overthrow of Satan's visible kingdom, in the downfall of the institutional opponents of the church, and especially at the day of judgment.
Most awful tokens of the divine wrath against the wicked have been or will be exhibited in all these instances.
God will make use of the wicked in this affair, but it will be for the glory of his justice and not of his mercy. They are reserved for the triumph of Christ's glorious power in overcoming and punishing them.
They are necessary parts of the drama, but they do not share in the final blessing.
They are some of those who shall be consumed with this accursed world after the day of judgment, when Christ and his church shall triumphantly ascend to heaven, leaving the temporary structures and the wicked who inhabited them behind.
Therefore, the source concludes with a solemn warning that is essential for every listener today. Do not be like the foolish people of the old world, who would not take warning when Noah told them of the coming flood.
Or like the people of Sodom who refused to flee from the wrath to come. Since the pattern of history is fixed and the destination of the river is certain, the time to choose the side of the work of redemption is now.
So what does this coherent, massive synthesis of history mean for us today? The unified vision of history presented here, where providence is seen as a vast, coherent plan starting and ending with God. It moves us away from viewing history as random chaos and sets the stage for absolute certainty regarding the future.
It means that we have been given a definitive framework for understanding global events. Every event, from the smallest change to the largest political revolution, is a calculated link in a chain guided by divine wisdom toward a known conclusion, the final, complete glory of Christ's kingdom.
The source closes with a solemn final declaration, emphasizing the speed of Christ's coming and the final, fixed separation that occurs at that point. He that is unjust shall be unjust still, and he that is filthy shall be filthy still, and he that is holy shall be holy still.
The time for repentance ceases, the building is finished, the two societies are permanently divided.
The provocative thought for you to carry forward from this deep dive is this. If the kingdom of Christ is the only kingdom that never gives place to another, the only everlasting structure in existence, how does that perspective change your understanding of security and effort in the current age?
What earthly pursuits, even good ones, are you viewing as a final building instead of a subordinate part of God's one great unified work?
It calls us to look beyond the temporary and align our deepest efforts with the only guaranteed reality.